recording in progress. Like I said, I can trim this part right here. So welcome to this YouTube video. This is going to be a interview conversation with Paul Wheaton in Missoula, Montana, and one of his property mates, Des Duchesne, will also have a little input here. Paul, I've known of for maybe 10 or 15 years. He's in a slightly different part of the Northwest, but we've crossed paths a couple of times. And of course, I've known about one of his primary projects is permies.com, perhaps the most extensive website for people interacting, talking about permaculture anywhere. We'll hear a little bit more about that. But Paul lives in a rural area and he has just so many different projects going on, and they're all about living more consciously, producing more from local sources, permaculture. So, what we're going to do is have a little conversation with Paul, and we hope you enjoy it. So, let's start off with a physical question, Paul. What exactly is your homestead? Just without great detail, describe what you have going on there. That's kind of your home base right there. Tell us about your place.
We have a couple hundred acres. It's divided into two properties. A smaller property, which we call base camp, which has like normal homestead stuff that you would expect from anybody living in the country, like, electricity and internet. And then there's this other property that's completely off grid. That one's much larger, and but it has lovely, luscious, deep soils. Whereas the first property is like one giant rock. It just happened. I mean, we're in the Rocky Mountains. You're gonna find some rock once in a while, and in giant pieces. And we're on a piece of giant rock making up the Rocky Mountains. But the other property, which we call the lab, that one has magnificently deep alluvial soils. It's when you're there, it's a jungle of trees. Everything grows so thick, which is a little unusual in the Rocky Mountains because the rock thing. So the alluvial soils really help to get magnificent things. And then so we do a lot of experimenting with permaculture stuff. You know what? I'm not sure of anybody doing more experiments than we are. I hope there are, but we do a lot of experimenting up on the lab. Some of the experiments include the wafadi, which is where we've got our own natural building style using materials from the land. And we hope to be able to create something. This will be the first big test this upcoming year, of the annualized thermal inertia. So we hope to be able to heat a home in Montana with nothing but the heat from the summer. So we will collect the heat from the summer completely passively and hold on to that through the winter. So annualized thermal inertia. That's one of our experiments this year. And we're working on the foundations built by people like John Haidt, who is the author of the Passive Annual Heat Storage book. And so he's done some things in Missoula along those lines. We also are just now wrapping up the construction of our Wafadi greenhouse, which is where we have a thoroughly passive greenhouse that we've constructed, and we're going to be testing the temperatures of that. And we're hoping to keep very high temperatures in a greenhouse without letting it get too warm. So the whole system is designed, because like greenhouses, they'll get too warm, and we have a system in place to passively be able to bring the too warm temperatures down into the earth without a fan, without any electricity whatsoever, and then store it there for use in the wintertime when it gets a little too cold.
So tell us a little bit about what this boot camp is. Where does that fit in, your boot camp?
So people come out here, they part with $100. We put them on a waiting list, and then they when they come out, they can be here they have to commit to at least a week. but we've got Des on the phone with us now. He's one of our commanders in the boot camp. And Des, I think you've been here 10 months. Is that right?
10 months, correct.
All right. And so I think right now we have more than a dozen people here in the boot camp. And I think that most of those people are going to be attending the PDC that starts in a couple of days. Oh, look, there you go. I mean, how many people is that? That's more than a dozen, isn't it? So people come out, they get to experience different kinds of permaculture projects throughout the week, and on the weekends, they can do their own permaculture projects. We call it soul labor. You can do whatever soul labor you want on the weekends. And then during the week, there's going to be a lot of natural building and gardening. And I don't know, Des, like, what have you worked on the last few days?
Just today I was working on gardening. Yesterday I was working on building the solarium. Yeah, the time is interesting here. There's a lot of things we do. It seems like the time is moving both fast and slow at the same time. I don't know how else to describe it. It's fun. I'm having a fun time.
Oh, good. Oh, good. So, all right. I don't know. We've got a list of probably 200 projects we want to work on, and we've got them in priority order. So we chip away at the top of the list. And I don't know. You had a picture up there for a second. I could see where people were working on the berm shed. So basically, we made a massive shed which holds 1,500 square feet. I think the total materials cost on that was $500. Most of it is trees, and there's a little bit of rocks. I mean, but trees and rocks we have plenty of. There you can see them putting the dirt on the top. And the left side there, you can see Allerton Abbey, where this guy is he's kind of putting an alder leaf in cob over that. And I gotta say too, like, you know, so Jan, you're in Oregon. I've been to a lot of natural building sites in Oregon, and a lot of those sites, it's like, okay, well, we got clay, but we had to have a dump truck deliver a load of sand. Whereas we're really fortunate in that we have way too many trees. And also we have 4 different kinds of sand and 3 different kinds of clay. And so we don't need to import sand or import clay or import wood. We've got all the wood and all the natural building materials we need, including rocks. So I know, Des, you've been playing with rocks. Oh, and I saw you moving a couple of huge logs around yesterday.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Let me just kind of shift a little bit here. That looks like a permaculture summer camp kind of a location. People are learning skills. It looks like a really good time because I've seen some of the other images, and it looks like an awesomely fun time. You also, Paul, have got a lot of other projects. You've done podcasts, you've written a book, you've done a TED Talk, you've made presentations and interviews. Let me just ask you, in your life, in your bio, what has caused you to move into this realm of education and concern for the planet, changing the world? Just give us a little bit of a bio. You were a software engineer. Maybe you're still doing some of that, but what you're doing now is a lot different than software engineering. What's made an impact on your life to cause you to do what you're doing right now?
I think a lot of it comes from the age of the newspaper. A long time ago, you'd read the newspaper and it's like you would read about these horrible problems and you might get some ideas about what could you do personally. There are people truly suffering, and it's kind of like I feel like I'm doing my worky job, and it's like I feel like there's so little I can do. But as you would read the newspaper, which is a non-interactive thing, I mean, it's so different than today. what can I do? What could I do? And it's usually it's nothing, but you kind of fester on it. Then comes the thought of like, if this horrible thing I'm reading about happened over there, surely somewhere in my future it could happen to me. What could I do to better prepare, to whatever? So it's like, how do I help others? How do I protect myself and the people I care about? Things of that nature. And then as the years passed.
And what years, what time frame are we talking about here?
Oh man, I mean, decades ago, I'm talking about the era that it must have been the 90s and even pre-90s. But I heard the word permaculture. Well, anyway, I started gardening. I became obsessed with gardening, absolutely bonkers about gardening.
And where were you living at this time?
Missoula,
Okay,
Montana.
You're a local person.
So then I do that, and then I keep hearing about all these horrible things that are happening, and you try to think of what all you can do. The obsession with gardening happens, and then at some point in time, I start to get the idea of how, for so many of these problems that I am wrapping my head around and reading about in the newspaper, I'm getting the idea of like how to be safe, how to help others. Like the solution to nearly everything is homesteading and permaculture, I believe. And it's like, I'm sure that there are many other philosophies out there, but I kind of feel like when you talk about people starving, then it's like, well, if they lived somewhere where there were massive gardens or the opportunity to do wildcrafting, then it's plausible that the starving would be either mitigated or non-existent. As we start talking about war and pollution, most of that's tied to energy. And so it's like, how might we live a more luxuriant life while simultaneously using a tiny fraction of the energy that we use now? And then of course there's the appeal of off-grid, but a lot of times the cost of off-grid is greater than being on-grid. And the things that we replace are not necessarily pure. They're not perfect. They're not, so it's kind of like, again, it comes back to like, if we can reduce our energy needs to a tiny speck and live a more luxuriant life with that, that would be more of a sense. So I'm starting to think, so you're asking me like, where did I get this? And I got to say that I kept evolving and evolving and evolving. And it was in 2004, I was working a contract for a company called Digital Globe, which does the satellite photography for Google Earth. So I was one of the architects for those systems. While I was there, I got the idea of like how if I could infect hundreds of millions of brains with permaculture, and permaculture would become a more household word, a lot of these global problems would just get to be small and eventually shrivel up and blow away, and things would be better. It's the knowledge is the problem. Getting all of this permaculture stuff into the brains of average people. That's the thing. And I tried to talk to permaculture leaders at the time, but they were all caught up in their own projects. That's when I realized that if it's going to happen, that I would need to quit my career and pursue this myself.
Yeah, you gained a real passion for this. So how did you first connect with permaculture?
I had 80 acres out on Mount Spokane, and my mind was overflowing with ideas of things I wanted to try. So I was trying all of these things, and a neighbor came by, and I was telling him all about all the things I'm experimenting with and all the things I'm trying. And he said, well, that's permaculture. And I said, well, what's permaculture? So he had the big black book, the designer's manual by Bill Mollison, and loaned it to me. And I'm reading through this book and I'm seeing that all these things I thought I'd invented, somebody invented before me. And there's a bunch of other stuff I'd never thought of.
Sure, yeah.
And so then I bought every book there was on permaculture and read them all, and got a bunch of movies and stuff that were, VHS was the thing back then. DVDs hadn't quite come out yet. And so I got those. And one of those was from Sepp Holzer. And I got super obsessed with the way Sepp Holzer did it. And eventually I went to my first PDC in 2004. So you asked, how did I learn? So there you go. There's how I got started in permaculture.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's very good. So what that's led to is all kinds of initiatives. I just briefly listed before. Let's take a short look at your different initiatives. You mentioned that the knowledge is there. Imagine that you were doing all these experiments and then found out this has already been done and people have even gone further than this. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So you have been reaching out to the wider world in a lot of different ways. Let's just touch on a few of those ways. Tell us what permies.com is.
So I created some forums a long time ago, and part of it is like, how do I reach hundreds of millions of people? And at the same time, I was getting so many emails asking questions, I wasn't able to keep up. So I created the forums, so that way I'm answering these questions just once instead of over and over and over again in email. And well, it's gotten really big. So now there's 1.8 million people each month, and I think 25 million.
Myself included.
Yeah. So I think that the information there is big. I think we now have, I think it's 200 forums there on, so 200 different topics, I guess, 200 different, and there's like, I think we're at 150,000 threads now, 150,000 threads of conversation.
So it's a convergence zone online for all different aspects of permaculture and ecological living.
We refer to it as a perennial discussion. So a lot of online stuff today is like, talk about this, and then we're going to flush this conversation down the toilet in 24 hours. Whereas at Permies, it's like, no, here's a thread that was started 12 years ago to talk about black locust. And it's like, people are still adding to this black locust thread. And it's like, so we do it perennial discussion. I think it's working out quite well. There's a lot of persistent knowledge, but we are, I think, before everybody races out there, you got to know it's heavily moderated. And we'll get people who will pop in there, and they bring their hostility, and it gets deleted like within minutes. And whether it's a commercial hostility, but in the permaculture movement itself, there can be some pretty serious hostility. People saying like, that's not permaculture. And what they mean by that is like, they did it one way, therefore no one's allowed to do it another way.
Yeah.
And so we embrace that there are many schools of thought under the permaculture umbrella, and we don't allow people to speak the truth. We only allow people to state their position. And there's some people that come to us and say, that's not the way forums work, and we ban them. And then it turns out to be that our forum does work the way that we say it works. It's gotten to be massive. And it's like, there are people where they want it to be something other than what it is, and we encourage them to start their own forum. So
yeah, that's permies.com. People can go online and find that, permies.com. It's easy to find. Yeah, you wrote a book called Building a Better World in Your Backyard. What's that about?
So just to be clear, the full title is Building a Better World in Your Backyard Instead of Being Angry at Bad Guys. And it's like, and then the people who make it their life to be angry at bad guys, they hate our book. It's like, whenever it gets mentioned, they're like, hey, we got to be angry at the bad guys. There's no other way. There's nothing you could say in this book other than, because being angry at the bad guys is the only way to go. So I read the Derek Jensen book, the one that's something like
Just
50.
just as an aside, Derek Jensen being an anarchist with a particular worldview. So go ahead.
Yes, what a polite way of putting it. Yes, but he makes so many good points. And so he's got that one book called, I think it's called 50 Ways to Stay in Denial as the World Burns. And he makes such powerful, compelling points. But basically in it, he
Very
says,
smart guy.
if we follow the recipe, and he uses the example of an inconvenient truth. And so it's like, if we do everything in that movie, it reduces, and if everybody in the United States did everything mentioned in the movie, it would cut our collective carbon footprint by 22%. But our collective carbon footprint grows by 2% a year. So in 11 years, we're back to where we started from. And now there's nothing else we could do. So I felt like the thing to do is like, I wanted to make a book that did much better than 22%. And I think that my book goes well into the thousands of percents. And it doesn't require everybody to do it. And so it's like, let's get right down to it. I'm going to mention things that are way beyond anything that Al Gore thought of in that. And it does seem like there's all these movies that come out and they're saying, oh man, we are so screwed. We're all going to die. And it's like, all you can do is buy light bulbs and that's it. We're all going to die. And I kind of feel like, you know what? There is so much more we can do. There's lists and lists and lists of things that these movies never mention.
Okay, so you're really into a realm that I have a great interest in too. What are some of the things people could do? I haven't read the book, but I'm sure that the locations that this could apply to could be rural, could be urban, could be suburban. We're talking about lifestyle and consuming habits. What are some of the highlights of what people can do in their own lives that you describe in the book to reduce eco footprints?
So let's talk about the average carbon footprint per adult in the United States is 30 tons. And that's direct and indirect. And a lot of people want to try and push a bunch of it off to industry, but you know what? If you stop buying those things, that industry shrivels up and goes away. Own that part of the industry. So 30 tons, let's start there. 30 tons, both direct and indirect. That's your whole package, including the industry that you're responsible for. So we start at 30 tons. Now the next thing is, and this is like the number one thing, if you heat your home, if you live in a cold climate, now, and you live in Eugene, Oregon, and it's cold enough, but I wouldn't call it a cold climate. Like where I live in Montana, I'm going to call that a cold climate. If you heat with electricity and you live in a cold climate, here in Montana, at the very least, your carbon footprint is 29 tons. So your overall carbon footprint is going to be higher than the American average. So the number one thing I say is, if you look in a cold climate, look at your heat. Now, the very next thing that happens is that people are kind of thinking to themselves like, I don't want to be cold, you know? And it's like, okay, I'm with you. And so their first thought is, I'm going to switch to natural gas. And it's like, well, natural gas, that will reduce about 65% of your carbon footprint, but now you've introduced other environmental disasters. But it's like, okay, you know, that's a way. But let's talk about ways to get it even better. Now, of course, if you go with passive solar, you got to build a whole nother home. So I've listed three, that's what so you mentioned my TED Talk earlier. In my TED Talk, I mentioned three different things. One of them is about heating the people in your home instead of heating the whole house. With that alone, you can eliminate 90% of your electric heat bill.
Is that like putting on more layers?
I didn't even touch that. You can put on more layers if you want. That would help, but it doesn't help very much, but it would help. I mean, in fact, my book is only about, everything in the book is how to make your life more luxuriant while simultaneously doing things that are better for the environment. So I think that a lot of people start talking about the environment and it's like, you must make sacrifice, you must suffer for the environment. And my book is like, no, you don't. Nope, nope, nope. We can do so much better and have a more luxuriant life. So everything in the book is about adding luxury and doing things good for the environment.
Yeah,
Now,
I would, we don't have time to go into great detail, but luxury is kind of in the eye of the beholder. What you consider luxury, I could probably relate to because we're on the same page. But somebody living in a penthouse in Manhattan up on the 98th floor, they've got a different idea about luxury.
oh no, I encourage them to live their most luxuriant life. And I, at the same time, hope that they'll read my book and then they'll find 9 things in there that they think will add more luxury to their life. And it just so happens to be that those 9 things are also going to make the, improve things environmentally. So no, I'm going to say you are 100% correct. In the eye of the beholder, it's subjective. And at the same time, rather than like chasing people with sticks and yelling at them and attempting to shame them into a path of environmentalism, I wish to bait them instead with more luxury. And it's like, no, you don't have to do this, but me and Jan are going to do it. And when you see us doing it, you're going to be like, I want some of that. Give me some of that. And
right.
so
That's kind of the, it's been stated in several different ways by different famous people. But in order to see the changes we want to see, we have to show that what we're doing is more fun and that other people want to do it, not necessarily by being critical of them, but showing that permaculture offers all these benefits.
So can I make your home warmer? Can I make you so warm that you're turning down the thermostat? Can I introduce something to you that costs nothing and it makes your life so warm and so luxuriant that you're turning the thermostat down so you can be more comfortable? And then it turns out to be that you have cut 29 tons of carbon out of your footprint and thus reduce the average carbon footprint for all of the United States. Because if everybody in a cold climate did this, then rather than saying it's 30 tons on average, it'll be more like 25 tons on average.
Yeah, I'm going to have to read your book about that. But heating isn't the only issue. Urban design, I live in a suburban area and have a great interest in urban design. The automobile culture, factory farms, what diet, these are other huge aspects of the pie chart of our carbon ecological footprint. It's got a lot of slices in it. And heating is only one of them. And the food we eat, the food choices, and to a very large degree, our transportation choices. We all know that automobiles have a oversized location, position in our transportation pie chart. So do you address these issues too, these different aspects of lifestyle?
Not only do I address these in my book, but I'm about to explode as you're saying them. And it's like so let's start with food. First of all, I want to make it clear, food is, for the average American, food is 35% of their footprint, which I believe ends up being about 10.5 tons. There is some misinformation out there that the standard American diet is 51%, and that was actually kind of like transposing some numbers. It was 15%. So switching from a standard American diet to a vegan diet actually reduces your carbon footprint by 15%, not 51% as has been misreported. But the thing I wish to powerfully advocate for, because if you're buying your food from a grocery store, that comes with a pretty significant carbon footprint to get it to you, as well as the carbon footprint that's involved in you going and getting it and bringing it home. And then on top of that, for example, the vegan diet is like there's a collection of beautiful values that come with a vegan diet. And the idea is like I don't want beautiful creatures to die in the name of feeding me. But if it's farmed at a factory, then that, like, all those carrots were grown in a giant field, a monocrop field, and then a giant machine went and dug all those carrots out of the ground and killed all kinds of animals along the way. And so it's kind of like those are contrary to the values of the vegans. However, if you're a vegan and you grow your food out of a garden, then, and it's right there, you can, if you can get to have like 90% of your food needs met from your garden, then not only have you met your values of not hurting beautiful things, but on top of that, your carbon footprint for all of that food has been eliminated. And so it's kind of like, no, it's the garden. It's the garden is the key. Now, I think another thing we have to embrace is the stuff about paddock shift systems and how they actually reverse carbon footprint. And it's like, now granted, a CAFO is a nightmare, but the paddock shift systems actually reduce it. It's difficult to do a paddock shift system if you're in an urban environment, like, you know, but people have done it. It's wackadoodle, but it can be done. So food systems, yes, I've got so much to say, but let me, if you don't mind, Jen, I'm going to jump in, and you're talking about about cars, and you're right, cars have a carbon footprint. Cars have a carbon footprint on average of 4 tons per year. And if you switch to an all-electric car like a Tesla, that'll go from 4 tons per year down to 2 tons per year. And so I just kind of feel like a lot of people feel like if I switch to a Tesla, I've solved all of my carbon footprint stuff. And it's like, no, yeah, put a tiny dent in it. And heat is going to make a much bigger difference. Food will make a much bigger difference. But I want to explore this with you for just a moment, because in my book, what I'm trying to say is exactly, I'm trying to address your exact concerns. And what I'm trying to say is, like, can I make a place that's so wonderful that the people that live there enjoy it so much that they just choose to not go away for a day or every day or whatever? They're so comfortable. And in my book, I try to describe a scenario of community living, and granted, that's got problems to be solved, but let's suppose that we've solved them. And so then there's people living in this community, and they each have a vehicle. Oh, and they have the worst vehicles. Jen, you'd be so angry to look at their vehicles. Oh, gas guzzling and polluting and old and not tuned up. They're terrible vehicles, huge vehicles, enormous vehicles. But they're parked. Like, most of them haven't moved in 3 months because they're getting all of their needs met where they are, and they don't feel like getting in their car and going anywhere. They could go anytime that they want, but they just don't feel like it. So now, without making a law requiring them to live a certain way and encouraging them to live their most luxuriant life, we have created an environment where we just don't drive.
Yeah, I'm all in favor of that. It's no mystery why so many people like to go on vacation with some big eco footprint to some distant place, because our urban places where people live are oftentimes the surrounding vibe and the context. Most people would want to take a break from that, because it's concrete, it's parking lots, it's cars, it's noise, it's polluted air. So what you're describing, I'm going to have to read your book to see more what you're describing, because it sounds good to me. I want to ask you a question about another project that you have, and that one is the whole idea. I think the acronym is SKIP, and basically that's this idea of, in our country, farmers are an aging population, and a lot of kids of farmers don't want to farm. The farmer is wondering, what am I going to do with my farm? I'd love to see all this work that I've made and spent my life. I'd like to see it passed on and continued somehow. And Skip is a way to connect people interested in farming with somebody who would like to have somebody continue with their farm. So explain Skip to us.
I love in order to describe this, the easiest way is my friend Mike Ayler. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the works of Mike Ayler.
Don't know him.
So he's the author of the $50 and Up Underground House book. Great natural building guy, genius, really genius. And he lived a few hours away from me before he died. But before he died, he was calling me every 2 months, begging me to give him the name of somebody who could be worthy and he could will his land to them, because he felt like his time was coming. And that's a whole nother story down there. But the thing is that I've actually talked to dozens of people. I mean, it's weird that I spent so much of my life in software engineering with the idea that someday I'm going to save up enough money and buy land and be able to like go and do the homesteading thing. And then once I'm there, I start running into all these super old people who want to give me their land, complete with 2 houses, a tractor, and all this stuff. And I'm kind of like, I can't take care of 2 properties.
You
and
have
it's
people
like
offer you their properties.
dozens of times. Okay.
Okay.
And they're like, okay, so I'm not going to do it. And I said, if you gave it to me, I would just liquidate it, just like either your kids or somebody in your family, and take the money and do my own thing. And so what you want is somebody who's going to, continue on and not just sell it. And you're like, yeah, that's what I want. And it's like, okay, they're saying, so who is that? I don't know. It's like, I've been looking for somebody for years. And it's like, so anyway, Mike was kind of like that. And he would bring in interns, but there was such a gap between what he needed and what they brought to the table. And they were glad to ramp up, but Mike wasn't the guy to teach him how to ramp up. And so then they just fell short, and then they would all leave either by their own volition or by Mike saying go or whatever. I mean, I'm sure you've worked with some intern people before. Some are great and some not so much. And but it's like he wanted somebody that was not going to just like be there. Like the interns that he knew were people that needed guidance. And what he needed was somebody that didn't need guidance. And it's like, so how do you get to that, to be that person? And it's like, it comes from time and doing stuff.
Yeah.
So I really felt for Mike and all these other people that have asked basically the same thing from me. And it was grinding in my head for years. And then I came up with this idea, because the other thing is that in permaculture, you can go get a PDC, but it's so now you're a certified permaculture designer. And it's kind of like, oh, that sounds really cool. But after 2 weeks, you're a certified permaculture designer. And it's like, let's look at your design. And it's like crayons, huh? And it's like, I really got to recommend a PDC, an in-person PDC. They are magnificent and glorious. They are just soul feeding. Oh, they're so good to go to. But yeah, Toby Hemingway, rest in peace, he also felt strongly that it's like, we need something that's more. And it's like, and the funny thing is that both Toby and Mike Ayler died at the same time as Bill Mollison. All 3 of them, all at about the same time. And I kind of felt like Toby had a really good point, and I kind of want to do this thing. And so it came to me, what if we kind of made something kind of like a PDC, but it was a little bit more substantial, like it's all hands-on stuff, because that's what Mike wants. Mike wants to see somebody who's built some stuff and maybe grown some gardens and gotten some stuff done. He wants to know, because for every person that actually did it, there's probably 20 out there that are saying they did it and they didn't. And so he can't tell the difference between the people that really did it and the people that are just talking the talk, you know? And so the next thing I thought is like, well, it would be good if it was free, if it could be done totally free. So we came up with the earliest versions of Skip, I don't know, like 7 years ago. And we've built it and built it and built it. And in the last couple of years, we've had tons of people doing this stuff. So basically, there's these little tasks, we call them BBs. You do, and I think to get PEP 1 certified, you do about 80 BBs. And then for PEP 2, it's like all the BBs are far more significant. They're bigger, it's bigger stuff.
You have a qualification, a rating system for how much accomplished a person, skills a person gains to qualify them to be connected with a farmer looking for somebody to take over his place.
So basically you're going to do all these little things. And when you've done enough, then you are now PEP 1 certified. And then you keep doing more things and then you're PEP 2 certified. Now it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to get PEP 1 certified. It should take about 3 or 4 months to get PEP 2 certified.
And where would you be learning this? What's the location?
The PEP stuff is designed for a cold climate, in environments similar to where I am. And, but dominantly at home or on land that you can work something out with somebody. We have come up with P1 certification, which is something that can be done by anybody, including people living in apartments. But that's another story for another day. The key is that we've got PEP 1, PEP 2, PEP 3, PEP 4, and PEP 4 is going to be a good 3 or 4 year kind of thing. And really what we're shooting for is PEP 4 to be able to inherit land. But at this moment, I believe so far we have one person that's gotten PEP 1. I believe that the first person to get PEP 2 will have at least 20 offers for land.
There's that much interest
Yeah.
in people retiring. I mean, my own permaculture property here, when I was reading about this for the first time, and it's something I've talked about with other people. I'm a senior myself and quite capable at the present time, but nobody lasts forever. I think there should be a suburban permaculture version of what you're talking about. You know, who is going to continue doing the stuff here on my property. So it's a good model.
Well, we've got it all set up so that way PEP and P are subsets of PECs. And so PEP is going to be permaculture experience according to Paul. And then, and the reason why we had to do that is because the world of permaculture is just far too massive. And so it's like, okay, so this is going to be my school of thought out of thousands of schools of thought. And it's going to be in a cold climate, which is what I'm focused on. And so it's going to be stuff that could be done at my place or at other places that are similar to my place. But we set it up as a subset of PECs. The idea being is that there could be PEJ. And so it's going to be permaculture experience according to Jan. And yours is going to be similar, but there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be a little bit more urban and suburban. And it's going to be a little bit more garden intensive. The natural building is probably not going to be as massive as the natural building that we do here. Things of that nature.
So you have a template that could be applied, the structure, and even some of the actual content would be very similar, but then it would be, the application would be maritime Pacific Northwest, or it could be subtropical Houston, Texas. People around the country, both in suburban places, but also in the farming context, which you described, could use what you've already put together and customize it for their location.
there is that. We're pretty emphatic that the X must be replaced with a human being, because we've already had a bunch of people saying like they wanted to make a PED for deserts, and it's like, no, you got to go with Bob, PEB, and Bob's idea of what you do in deserts, because there's going to be, in time, there could be 15 different desert-based PEXs, each of them radically different from the others. And so don't be thinking that Bob is the authority on desert stuff. No, Bob's just one doofus, and he's not the king of all deserts and permaculture. No, he's one person.
Yeah,
so that's why it's PEP, Paul. It's one doofus, one putz who's saying, this is what I think for this climate. I'm not the ultimate authority on permaculture. I'm not the ultimate authority on cold climate permaculture. I'm just one theory, one philosophy.
Yeah, that kind of I just
where's your American gun to shoot that answering machine?
Yeah. Yeah, what you were just saying kind of relates back to the permies.com. Nobody owns the topic. It's your version of that topic. Yeah, that's really good. Let's move along a little bit. I appreciate that a whole lot, Paul. Let's ask Des a question here. Des, you have been staying there on site for what, 8 or 10 months? Just briefly, because we don't have a lot more time, but just tell us a little bit about your experience there.
My experience here in the boot camp has been soul building. The work that I do here, the things that I get to experience. For example, I came to Wheaton Labs with little to no experience in carpentry. And then I took on a very, very, very small project to build a 1-tier shelf that's about 1 foot tall and 1 foot wide as my first carpentry project. It had like 8 screws. And I was like, how am I gonna do this in the beginning? And after I built it, I got a little more confident and I built a slightly bigger shelf. And then after that, a slightly bigger shelf. And recently, the shelf that I built has wheels, and people like it. It's about 5 feet wide, 8 feet tall, 2 feet deep, and it holds all of our regularly used hand tools like shovels, pickaxes. And I'm confident enough now that I can build something bigger. So now I'm working on helping with the project to build a solarium, which is basically a glass room. Yeah.
A solar space. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. A solar space.
So how did you find out about the boot camp there?
Yes, great question. I was kind of feeling over the money game, so to speak, the consumerism game. And I was looking for an alternative way of trading, or I guess working to live. I didn't really want to have a whole lot of money in my life anymore. One of my goals became to basically eliminate all of my bills. I'm down to 2 bills right now. I used to be at 5 or more, I think. So I started looking online for ways to live on site where I work. And then I found about like 20 different things before I came across the rocket mass heater. Somehow, Paul put up a YouTube video of him talking about the rocket mass heater, he mentioned the word efficiency, and it just hooked me because I'm all about efficiency. And then I started kind of down the rabbit hole of Paul's channel on YouTube and the other things he had to talk about, which led to some of his other talks, like the TED Talk. And then it led me to Permies.com. And once I got to Permies.com, I was like, how do I get there? Who is this guy? How do I get there? Does he have something that maybe I could fit into? And then the boot camp. And I didn't believe it was true because all the other places, they were either asking for more experience, and I think some of them were asking for more resources from my end. Yeah, and I signed up. Somehow I got accepted, or I got, yeah, and I got here. I still didn't really believe it was true. 10 months later, I'm starting to believe it's true. I mean, it's just fun. It's just fun. Yeah, I love being here.
Yeah.
How long do you think you're going to be here, Des?
At this moment in time, I'm still going with forever.
Yeah. Okay. Let's. That sounds like an endorsement to me. Let's go back to Paul here. Thanks, Des. That's great. Paul, as we're kind of coming in for a landing here, just tell us a few little anecdotal stories. What are some of the highlights of what gives you satisfaction? What makes your day and reaffirms that what you're doing is helping you accomplish what your vision is? Just give us a couple, two or three. Des may be one of them right there. What do you think?
I think hearing Des talk about his intent to be here forever fills my soul. I think that there's other people here that kind of say things similar. I enjoy hearing from the Boots when they say that this is the most soul building thing that they've ever done. I like to hear that all the time. I kind of feel like in 2004, one of the things, and maybe Jan, you could tell me if your analysis is similar. I feel like permaculture was regarded by many as a bit of a dirty word, that it had a bit of a darkness to the word permaculture. Like there was a lot of ugliness with permaculture, and I kind of feel like I set out to say, no, permaculture is a very good thing. It's a design science, and and so with Permies.com. We have such strict moderation that we keep it hyper focused on the good stuff and talking about how to build, how to move forward, how to grow, things of that nature. And then when the negative Nellies come, we just delete all of that. I think that today permaculture is a far more positive word, and I choose to believe, and I could be wrong, but I like to believe that I played a major role in that. And with the effort of Permies.com, with the number of people that we've touched with it, we've made a lot of difference. And then as for where we're going, I think that here, I like the idea that someday with our natural building efforts and our permaculture polycultures on hugelkultur, that we will have somebody, there will be a day, probably 6 years in the future, somebody will show up with stage 4 cancer, and in a week they'll be cancer free. I like to imagine that we're going to accomplish that. And I know that already 90% of the people that are listening to this are thinking that's bullshit. But I'm talking to the 10% that are like, he's going to do it. And I'm going to go there. So that's one of the many things. We talked earlier about how community has problems. A lot of the recipes right now for intentional community are failing. So we're all about experimentation. We've got experiments on community, and I'm hoping that those will be a success. But of course, community is something that takes years. Even if you're experimenting, it's going to take decades. And so, but we're working on it. And I hope that we'll be some degree of successful. In fact, Jan, you're in Eugene, Oregon. I went to Lost Valley many years ago. Lost Valley is getting better and getting better every year. But when I was there 13 years ago, 14 years ago, I did exit interviews on the people that were leaving, and hardly anybody had been there for more than 2 years. And I interviewed people that were leaving, and they'd been there for not quite 2 years. And it's like, these systems need to get better. We need to come up with better recipes for intentional community, for Americans.
Absolutely.
For Americans, yeah.
Yeah, I've done a number of conversations with people involved with intentional communities, LA Eco Village, East Blair Housing Co-op here in Eugene, Enright Ridge and Cincinnati. I think eco villages absolutely need to be in some form a huge part of the kind of future that will fit within what planet Earth can sustain. But yeah, eco villages, and they are challenging, absolutely.
And so the challenging part, as we all know and fear, is drama. And it's like, how do you grab hold of that drama knob and turn it down to being 1/10 of what we see in most of our intentional communities? And so that's been our hyper focus. I mean, Des and I have talked about it quite a few times, as well as several of the other people that are living here now. And I think we're on a good track right now, but really the way to test it is to go 5 years. So when Des has been here 5 years, it's like, that's proof that it's working. And we've already got one other guy that's been here 6 years. We really need to keep our experiments going, but it of course has its challenges, but I think we're getting better and better and better every year. We have a hyper focus on reducing resentments and all the different ways that they can crop up. But it's an experiment. We're experimenting on human beings. Some people might object to that. But I think that there's been some beautiful people that have come that are willing to be participants in this experiment. And it's been, I don't know, soul building. It's been good. I'm so glad we're doing it. It's just good.
And sharing it with the wider world also.
True. I mean, yeah, that's how you reach millions, hundreds of millions, and billions. So at this point in time, I think I've reached almost 200 million people with one thing or another.
Yeah.
And I hope, I wish that many people have read my book, but at this time, the book is doing quite well. About 30,000 people have bought the book, which is pretty good. I think we're in the 99th percentile of books, but I kind of wish it was closer to like 100 million or so rather than 30,000.
Yeah, well, I'll add to your number. Okay, Paul, final thoughts.
Live large. We were talking earlier about heat. I want to say rocket mass heater, Wafati. I do think focus on that carbon footprint, but first off, live large, live your most luxuriant life, and then save the planet. That without sacrificing any luxury whatsoever. I think that's what I want to tell people.
Well, that's a lot to think about. So, well, Paul Wheaton and Des, appreciate very much your sharing time with us today. You've got an awesome amount of experience and knowledge and wisdom.